Whether your beer is in a bottle, can, or glass, kick back and relax. It's Better on Draft.
We are live, episode 285 of the Better on Draft podcast. My name is Ken. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are not watching live, you can, of course, join us live every Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern, Facebook.com/Better on Draft, Twitch.tv/Bod Podcast, or BetterOnDraft.tv. For myself, I am still sober, which means I am going to be drinking from Athletic Brewing. I've got Wits Peak. I also have from Athletic Brewing, I've got their First Ride, which is their stout with coffee. And I also have a Big Drop Galactic Extra Dark. Starting with Nicholas. Nicholas, what do you got over there?
I am drinking a Firestone Walker Blank Noise, the Hazy IPA, and I also have the Union Jack IPA from Firestone Walker.
A lot of IPAs tonight. Daniel, what do you got over there?
I'm going hard. I've got a Firestone Nitro Merlin, probably one of the best nitro stouts you can get in America, in all honesty, and a 2022 Parabola.
Oh, you are definitely going hard. Rob, can you top that?
No, I can't, because he has the Parabola, and apparently I drank my last one. But I do have the Firestone Blank Noise Hazy IPA, and I have the Mine Haze IPA, also from Firestone.
Well, if you couldn't tell for the fact that we have a bunch of Firestone beers on our show tonight, that means our guest is most likely from Firestone. We do have Sam in our studio. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do at Firestone and what you're drinking.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on with you guys. And so I am the brewery manager for our pilot R&D brewery in Venice Beach, which we call the Propagator. And I've been here for just shy of 3 years, but I've been with Firestone for almost 11 years total, and was a brewer at our main facility up in Paso Robles for years before that. I'm actually drinking this new Maibach that we just put on tap today. It's a collaboration with Moonlight Brewing up in Northern California. It's called Arlo's Daydream, and it's tasting really nice. It's a little hoppier than your standard German Maibach. We kind of took an approach where we kind of hopped it a little more like a Pilsner. Really tasty. First Maibach we've ever done, so I'm really stoked for it. Unfortunately, not packaged, though.
Well, you did mention that previously to brewing at the Propagator, you were still brewing for Firestone Walker. So my first question is going to be more geared towards that. What is, for those outside of the city, not in Venice, not in the area, what are the differences between the regular Firestone Walker brewery and what do you get a chance to do at the Propagator that you don't necessarily did get a chance to do when you were at the original brewery?
So we're a really small brewery down here. It's a 10-barrel brew house. We have 20-barrel tanks, so we can make just enough beer basically to feed the 3 pubs that we have. So we have our location here in Venice Beach, just about a mile up from the Venice Pier, in LA. And then we have our Bear Works facility in Buellton, where we do sour beer production, and that's up in Santa Barbara County, about an hour and a half north. And then the main facility is up in Paso Robles, which is, right in the middle of the Central Coast. So it's about a 3.5 hour drive from here, depending with traffic. So we kind of are all up and down the coast. And the facility here, we're only making beer essentially to be sold out of the breweries. We don't do any distro beers. We don't do any of the core beers here. It's all small batch production. We do some can runs here where we have a mobile canner come in. So we'll do really limited can releases. We were trying to get them in once a month last year, and then we kind of, cooled things down a little bit this year, and we're doing a little bit less. But we're really focusing on, trying to get interesting beers out, and a lot of them we're bringing collaboration partners with. So you can mail order some of our beers. In California, a few other limited states that allow direct-to-consumer sales across state lines, but a lot of states don't. So we're still, mostly in California, and then we sell most of those at the breweries. But otherwise, the Firestone main brewery, obviously, much larger scale, much larger production, distribution footprint. So what we're doing here is really mostly R&D work and, small projects, things that we just want to develop over time.
Is the goal to move things that you've created over at the R&D facility up to the main brewery, or is it just kind of your own little playground that nobody bothers you in?
It's a split between the two. We're working on a lot of projects of things that we specifically know we want to brew on a larger scale, and we want to work the recipes out here. We want to test ideas. Sometimes it takes a while. We just know there's certain styles that we want to be playing around with. So we come up with ideas and we just brew different versions of those styles and then, see what we think. We have a really robust sensory program up at the main brewery. So I have got a very qualified team of people sitting down with every beer that comes out of here and giving really honest feedback. And then everyone's thinking about, okay, what do we like with this beer? What didn't we like? What could we do in the future? So we have a really good program that gives me a lot of good feedback here. And then we tweak the recipes based on that. So most of the new releases that are coming out of the main brewery are brewed here first in some form. But in addition to that, yeah, we do a lot of interesting stuff. Like we have old beers that we want to bring back. For instance, Wookie Jack. That's a beer that for us was really popular for a few years, and then we had to take it out of our normal lineup. But we still bring it back here from time to time. And then a lot of other things we just like, to have on at the pub. We have a few taps open that we can just have interesting beers on that we want to see what people think, and we don't necessarily have any plans for them. We just want to kind of do it and see how it goes. And just have fun.
I actually have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Ken. I just kind of wanted to jump in and ask something here while we were fresh on it. So you're brewing the beers for your pubs locally. Can I walk into one of your pubs and get like an 805 then? Or would I have to go? Is that something you don't serve on tap at your location?
Oh, we do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. So we have about 35 beers on at any given time here. And that's going to be basically every core Firestone beer, and then different selections of our Barrelworks beers and our vintage bourbon barrel aged beers, spirit barrel aged beers. And then we're going to have a bunch of Propagator beers on as well. So there's always a great selection.
Awesome. Sorry, Ken, go ahead. I was just curious.
No problem. Now, before I pass it off to Rob, because usually Rob follows me, there is a question, and it's more of clarification information, because Firestone Walker, the Brewers Association, just announced like the top breweries based on production in 2021, which Firestone Walker was one of the top 10 because they're as they are also part of a larger conglomerate. You guys are in collaboration or ownership with Omegang and Boulevard, which we actually had on episode 270. Do you have to worry about these massive collections of breweries kind of like interfering with you, or are you free to kind of run around the brewery and do whatever the hell you want?
I think overall the relationship's been really good, and I really have nothing negative to say about it. I think for the most part it's very hands-off. It's a lot of guidance and a lot of, long-term strategic thinking, capital expenditure, that kind of stuff, as far as guiding us to the most efficient path to growth and sustainability. But at the same time, I think, we have been on a really good trajectory. And I think that we've basically continued on that path. And for the most part, it's just been like, just kind of do your thing. And, if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
All right, so I guess I'm going to jump in here. I guess the first question I wanted to ask about was really, I guess just in terms of the market that's there in California, and I guess really in the Los Angeles area specifically. I guess the first thing is that I'm a little saddened because I was in LA last October out in Anaheim, and I didn't realize how close the Propagator is to LAX, and I did not get a chance to go out there. But the one thing I'm kind of curious about is just really what, or I guess how the LA market is, because, as I feel like most states have their own stereotypical thoughts of what other states are doing, that the LA area is kind of blasé about a lot of things that are going on, at least from my Michigan perspective, unless it has anything to do with the Lakers or the Dodgers. I mean, the Rams just won a football championship, and the parade looked like there was just nothing but a whole bunch of stragglers that were just hanging around. What's the market like in Los Angeles, and how is that just kind of propelled the business, and I guess the Propagator in general?
I do think LA is a really interesting area in that, like, there's a ton of transplants here, but there's also a really strong culture of people that are from here, and it's an interesting mix of the two because you have people from all around the world that move here, mostly for the entertainment industry and for other kind of stuff related to that. I mean, really for a lot of things. I shouldn't say just that, but yeah, and I think because of that. Yeah, especially with like the sports teams, you can see, it's like everyone gets into the Dodgers and the Lakers, sure, but like with the Rams, it's like, oh, okay, I don't know, they get maybe it'll take a little more time to earn their place back. I'm not sure, but yeah, with regards to like kind of the beer industry and how it relates to that, I think for us, 805 has been a really strong performer in the LA area, and that was why we decided to open a brewery down here. We were already having a lot of success in this market. There weren't a lot of big breweries. We were in LA back when there were only a couple breweries in LA, and we sold a lot of beer here. And then over the years, many breweries did open. LA, for one of the largest cities in the country, it had almost no breweries comparatively. I mean, just a handful in the whole county up until, 10, 15 years ago. And then it really started to blow up. Living on the Central Coast, when I started at Firestone, looking back about 10 years ago, I would, drive to San Diego to go visit breweries, and we would just drive through LA, and there wasn't really a whole lot. And then, one by one, places started opening, and then you would maybe stop. And then, we really saw the energy starting to swell up, and we said, we should open a location down here. That's a great opportunity. And yeah, like I was saying, since we already sold a lot of beer in this market, it already kind of felt like our backyard, and it just seemed like a natural extension. But, the biggest kind of craft brewery in LA is Golden Road. And, obviously they're not technically a craft brewery, but, there's not really any other big players, right, in the city. So it's a little interesting of a market. Whereas, you go down to San Diego and there's, multiple large craft brewers that are well-established that have been there for a long time. And for some reason, just the city of LA, made it a little more difficult, a little less desirable to open breweries, and people kind of stayed away. That has changed, and there are a lot of small breweries, but they're all, they're kind of similar to us, where, they're cranking out a small amount of beer. They got a good taproom culture going. And there's a lot of breweries like that in LA now making really good beer.
Yeah. Now, and obviously there is one that has been in the news that is from San Diego that obviously is just kind of, I feel, kind of hit hard. But I'm going to kind of leave that off to the side for a little bit. But I'm kind of curious, just being on the experimental side of Firestone Walker. Obviously the Propagator opened back in 2016. You joined the team there in 2019. Are there any beers that have come out of the Propagator that have hit into a higher distribution for Firestone?
Well, I guess you could say there's the beers that we kind of plan long term. We know, okay, this is what our next seasonal release is going to be, or this is a new year-round beer that we're going to work on, and then we get to work on it here. So, kind of starting there, I think the first good example of that would have been, Mine Haze and Rosalie. I guess Firestone Lager, when we brought that back, we trialed it here first. Then Rosalie, Mine Haze. Mine Haze was, those are both really big projects, those two. Rosalie, unfortunately, didn't make it through the pandemic. That was one of those beers that, it maybe needed a little more time. It was a kettle sour rosé wine hybrid beer, a really ambitious project on our end. And I'm really happy with the beer we ended up making, but, the distro didn't support that into 2020. And it was, a really difficult beer to make on a production scale. So we ended up taking that out of production. But Mine Haze obviously has grown into our, it's about floating around the second place here right now in our lineup after 805, 805 Cerveza. It's kind of somewhere around there. And, that took multiple batches because for us, it was relearning how to brew an IPA. We were firmly a West Coast IPA brewery. And so, getting that going took a lot of work here. And then finally we kind of were like, okay, this is the recipe. This is the approach we're going to use. And that was a big team project that Evan was the head brewer down here at the time, making those batches. There were a bunch of us up in Paso working on that end. So all of these big development projects take a lot of work, whether it's, Matt Brynildson, our brewmaster, kind of guiding the whole thing. Me down here, Brad Miles, who does R&D up there, and the rest of the brewing team. We always get a lot of good input. So, yeah. And then newer beer like Hopnosis, is a good example. That's our latest year-round IPA we just launched. That was something else that we worked on here as well. So a lot of times, we know we have a clear goal. We say, this is the beer we want to brew, and then we just need to make it happen. Other times it works a little differently. So there's a beer we do called Welcome to LA. That's a Southern California distro beer. It doesn't get out of Southern California at the time. Right now it's, the name is kind of, geography dependent, Welcome to LA, but that was a beer we just started making here, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen. And we just kept brewing batch after batch, and we liked the name, we liked the beer. And so we ended up putting that in distribution. So, sometimes it could happen either way, but most of the beers that we do end up putting in a distribution that we brew here were beers that we had a clear goal in mind as far as what we wanted to do.
Gotcha. And I guess that, since you brought up the Mind Haze, I'm getting ready to take a sip of the Blank Noise. I guess, can you give us an overview of what I should expect when I'm drinking this beer?
So yeah, Blank Noise is, it's this combination of the Hallertau Blanc hop and Nelson from New Zealand. So both of those hops have these interesting kind of white wine grape, tropical fruit notes, a little bit of diesel maybe. That's mostly from the Nelson. And, it's really cool that there's these two hops grown, completely on the other side of the world, one in Germany and one in New Zealand, but they have these similar flavors. So the synergy of the two coming together is kind of like this, like this interesting harmony that happens. And you get kind of two slightly different versions of a similar note happening. And obviously, we're kind of playing on the music theme, since Hallertau Blanc is playing on the kind of Sauvignon Blanc thing. And, so instead of white noise, it's Blanc noise or Blank noise. So yeah, and I think, I get a lot of great, kind of grapey tropical dank notes out of that. And then that's kind of our tried and true hazy IPA model there, where, it's like we found that kind of sweet spot in the low 6% alcohol range, where it's a super drinkable, balanced beer. It's not too heavy, it's not too sweet, and it lets that hop flavor shine, that juiciness, without being overbearing. So I think, like, for us, that's kind of like where we like our sweet spot for hazies, the kind of beer that you can drink a few of and not necessarily this huge sweet kind of fun. I mean, the really big hazies can be fun, the super juice bombs, but we like beers like that are almost sessionable.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting getting the grape off of that, because it almost kind of gives that feel like this is something that wine drinkers should be okay with drinking, because it kind of gives off that little bit of that wine feel to it. So it's definitely tasteful. But one other question I wanted to ask, and I found this very interesting, that I heard in another interview that you'd given a statistic that, and I think this was last September, that you've given a statistic that Sam Adams' portfolio was only 9% of their total sales coming from the Boston beer, and basically a large chunk of that coming from the truly hard seltzers. Now, as of that interview, you guys at the Propagator have not brewed any seltzers. And I was wondering if that was still true, and if that was something where it was intentional, where you did not want to brew any seltzers, or it's just kind of we're holding off on it and we'll get to it when we get to it kind of thing, I guess, or rather, is it something that you want to even do?
So we do actually have a seltzer in our portfolio, and it wasn't developed here. So last year, we actually acquired a brand from a neighbor friend of ours, a slow brewing company, and they had developed this line called Cali Squeeze that were fruit beers and some seltzers. And we really liked the branding and the beers, and we decided, instead of going out and kind of developing our own thing here, we asked them if they'd be interested in selling it. So we acquired those brands, and so we're currently producing them. And so, so we have a seltzer basically that came kind of fully ready to go. So the fun thing about seltzers too is, once you kind of have the base, it's a very modular concept. So you can kind of add whatever fruits you want to and all that. So we are working on new stuff in the R&D department, new flavors, and we have some new stuff that's just about to come out there. And so, if you come in, we do serve Cali Squeeze seltzers at our tap rooms, and they are in distribution on a smaller scale now. And we're kind of going to see where that goes. And it's nice, I have noticed, at first I wasn't super stoked on seltzers, but when you do start serving them, you realize there's a lot of people that come in that, are celiac or don't want, gluten or for some reason, or just want a different flavor profile, and having that option for them has been really great. And, at various times I look around and I see a lot of people drinking them. So, it's just one of those things where it's like, if you can make a good version of it, feel good about it, why not?
Cool. And I guess going back to beer, one of the other things that I was interested in was, I guess, realizing that Firestone Walker being one of the founding members of the Hop Quality Group. I'm curious, what is the Hop Quality Group, and how do they help Firestone Walker in their business overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it just so happens that we brewed an experimental pale ale this week with a Hop Quality Group experimental program hop. And so that's one of the cool things the Hop Quality Group is doing right now. It's a group of brewers. There's a few dozen of us now. The ranks have grown over the last 2 years as we've decided to bring in more members outside of the kind of smaller group that initially started it. So now we're working with the USDA. We're sponsoring a breeding program that they're working on that's bringing some new hop varieties forward. And the advantage with that is, with a small group of brewers, we're able to kind of steer the direction that these hops are going and tell them what we really like. And I think, we have an amazing group of brewers working on this right now, and you're going to see some really cool hops coming from that in the next few years. And so this is the first time that we've actually brewed a full Propagator batch with these hops, and I'm really excited for this variety. And there's a bunch of other Hop Quality Group brewers that are brewing similar batches right now. And then at the Craft Brewers Conference in Minneapolis next month, we're going to have a big tasting where everybody's going to be able to drink the beers and talk about what we like and kind of figure out where that program is going to go. So I'm really excited for that. But just kind of on an annual basis, a lot of what the Hop Quality Group has done is outreach to growers and, the hop industry, and just kind of communicating what brewers really valued, right to the farmers, and being able to kind of go and really talk about, first and foremost that, our whole kind of motto is, well, there were a couple. The initial was oils over alpha, and it was saying that, traditionally the hop industry in the U.S. was mostly, they had some aroma varieties, but it was mostly bittering hops, and it was just getting the highest alpha acid you could because you needed to make hop extract. But, we were telling everybody, hey, hop oils are really important. It's all about the aroma of the hops, and a lot of these high alpha hops, actually, if you grow them a little bit differently, you get really interesting aromatic profiles. So there was that. And then the other side of that is that hops are a food product. And traditionally, the hop industry, the approach was kind of like, well, a lot of this is going to extract, and, the extraction process is going to take out any impurities. So you don't need to really worry as much about cleanliness or things like that. It's not like you're processing like a fresh vegetable that's going to go, you're not making lettuce that's going to go to a store, and you have to be really careful about. And then, as over time, craft became more important, we had to kind of step up and say, hey, we add a lot of these hops to our finished beer. They're not getting boiled. They're not turning into extract. We're just taking whole hops or hop pellets and putting them in beer. So it's really important that this is treated more like it was like a vegetable and is handled with these, food standards and all that. So, we've been communicating that to growers for years and years now. And it's amazing how well they've responded. And I think, we developed a great relationship with the industry. And I, the American hop industry is doing really well right now. And I think a big part of that is craft beer. And, they love everything, all the new hop varieties they've been able to develop. And, and that the fact that we just love it and we're so passionate about it, we come visit every year. So it's been really good.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it over to Dan after this one, but I am kind of curious with a follow-up with this. Is there anything that you personally would like to see in the hop industry that would help you move forward?
They're doing so much already. It's tough to say. Yeah. I think between concentrated hop products, like the different kind of pellets, like cryo hops, I think that stuff's really cool. And the innovations in extract are really cool too. There's a couple new products like Incognito and Spectrum from Haas right now are really cool. So I don't know. I think, the best I could say is that I just hope that we can participate in developing more sustainable varieties that work for everybody, high yielding, more drought tolerant, as the climate in Yakima, is trending towards being drier and hotter, we need to keep developing varieties that make sure that, we're making amazing beers for years to come. So that's something that I really want to see moving forward.
All right. Now, I was taking a look at your Propagator series, and I noticed you have a collaboration in there with Russian River. Did you get a chance to work on that? And if so, can you tell us about what that was like working with them?
Yeah, that's a really cool beer, Stevo. So it's a Keller Pilsner, and that's a beer that we've brewed multiple times actually at the main brewery in Paso. And this time we decided, we want to do a small run of it down here and put it into cans. So the couple times we'd done it before was draft only, and we did a couple larger releases. I think the first one was in 2016, and then we came back. We did another one when we put our new brew house in line, and yeah, those have all been great, but they were draft only. And we said, okay, we just want to get it in cans and get it out there a little bit more, so some more people can try it that didn't get to ever try it in the past, because our draft footprint was always limited when we released that. I think it was mostly just California that we sent that out to. So it was really great, just basically scaling the recipe down. We'd only brewed on the big brew houses, and originally it started as a tweak on Pivo and combining it with STS Pilsner from Russian River. And, they're both relatively similar Pilsners, just kind of hop forward, lightly dry hopped. But the biggest differences are that they use French Aramis hops, and we use German Saphir as kind of the main dry hop, finishing hop in Pivo. So we combined the two, and we said, hey, why not brew a Pilsner and just, put those two hops together and see how it goes. And then, we'll leave it unfiltered, and there you have it. So it's just one of those fun beers where you just take two somewhat similar, but, distinctively different in some ways beers and kind of mash the recipes together. And it works in a beer like that. And it worked out really well. Those two hops actually work really well together. We just scaled the recipe down here. So I made sure, everything was going to work, and we hit all our numbers on the small brewery. And then Matt and Vinny came down here, and we had an awesome brew day and got the beer brewed. And it was, I think it turned out really good.
Awesome. Now, the editor of our website actually had a chance to review Cookie Monster Double Milk Stout previously. What exactly makes it a double milk stout, and how does that fit into the current portfolio?
So that was kind of a play on, we do our Merlin Milk Stout, which is a year-round beer for us. And I just want to do a bigger version of that and, boost it up. So, traditionally, kind of going by English brewing conventions, you would have a stout, you'd have a double stout, imperial stout. And so that, to me, that double stout is kind of in that range of, about 8%, maybe not quite imperial, but, we kind of just doubled up the recipe. We added a couple more fun dark malts that I'd been wanting to play around with. And then adding, the additional ingredients. And so the idea was kind of a milk and cookies concept. Nothing terribly complicated, just, it's already milk stout. And then adding brown sugar and vanilla and cocoa nibs kind of played up the chocolate chip cookie notes in it, and kind of brought all those decadent flavors together. So, we got whole vanilla beans and cocoa nibs, and basically conditioned the finished beer on those. And then in the brew house, we added brown sugar to get some of those molassesy notes.
Awesome. Now, Firestone's known for some good barrel-aged, stouts, barley wines, things like that. Do you have a hand in coming together and putting together some of these at the Propagator? Are you the one involved with that as far as testing out new ideas? And if so, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So not much. I did used to work, on barrels a good deal back when I worked up in Paso, but then coming down here, not really. So Eric Ponce manages our barrel program up in Paso now. And so most of that's under his guidance, but I have done some work here helping him, with different base beers. So we actually just did a barrel aged beer here, which isn't going to see a release for some time now, but we brewed a Belgian quad that we put into brandy barrels, and I'm really excited to see how that goes. And there's some small projects like that. We're actually working on another one right now that's going to be really interesting that, it's going to be some sort of interesting twist on a barley wine that, you'll have to see what happens with that later on. But, we're still in the planning phase. And the cool thing about, barrel projects here, and we have a beer club now that we can do these really small releases into. And the cool part of that is that we have more flexibility to do these really small projects like the quad and like some other stuff going forward, where we only need to fill a few barrels at a time and do maybe, a couple hundred cases. Whereas, traditionally our barrel program is these larger releases where it's maybe 50 barrels up to, 200 or 300 barrels for something. Our main Parabola release is hundreds of barrels at a time. So it's way beyond the scope of what we do here, but we can do some fun stuff here too.
And one final question from me before I pass it along. I noticed you actually do a hazy oat IPA. I don't know if everyone's familiar with an oat IPA. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what it is and what sets it apart from like a traditional IPA?
Yeah, it's mostly just that was us trying to push the limits of how high of an oat percentage we could use in a beer. Usually when we started doing hazy IPAs, we were using flaked oats or rolled oats, and we would do maybe 10, 15% at the most. And, beyond that, it gets really sticky, really gummy. It's really hard to get wort out efficiently when you're mashing with a lot of oats. And then, the only way to really do that is to move into malted oats that still have their husks on. And that allows you to louder the beer more effectively. So that was, that release was basically our attempt to say, okay, well, we're going to go all the way up to 50%, which is like a crazy amount of oats. I don't know. I'm sure somebody has tried to make 100% malted oat beer. I don't know what it would be like, but maybe we'll have to try that at some point. But it's so different. Oats really do on a large, when you include them in a large percentage in a beer, they do change the character. You have that just distinctively oaty texture and flavor that starts to come out. Whereas, traditionally in like an oatmeal stout, you're maybe like 10%, and that's enough to kind of add a little bit of nice, addition to it. But a 50% oat IPA was definitely something. And I think it turned out pretty well. It's one of those ones where it's like, did we push it too far? That's for you to decide.
All right, I'm going to pass it over to Nick.
So being that you're in Venice, the R&D facility, how many, it's just weird that there's R&D facilities with breweries. How many projects do you normally go through in a year that probably don't make it to the taps by any, at all? How many projects do you think you put through in a given year that never see the public?
Not very many.
Oh,
yeah. Most of what we're doing here is a little bit further along, or it's a concept, so yeah, we're primarily looking for beer to put in front of people. So sometimes the beers that we brew here don't work, that it happens sometimes, but for the most part, we're like, okay, here's a new concept. Here's how it's going to work. And it's somewhat, we're going to make a good beer no matter what. We're not going to do anything too crazy. And I think that there's just so much collective experience in this brewery. And so when we do try things, or we lean on, colleagues in the industry and other breweries that have done things. So whenever we're looking to bring in something a little bit out of our comfort zone, we'll do a lot of research. We'll talk to people. And usually that first attempt still makes a pretty good beer, even if it's not exactly what we want, and still we're seeing what people think and serving. But yeah, we also have a really small scale R&D setup that we actually still run in Paso, and that gives us a lot of flexibility. So yeah, our R&D program kind of has a few layers to it, and the really small scale stuff, it's like a 1 barrel size brewery. And what we'll do is we'll divert wort from the main brewery, and we can ferment it, condition it in these small tanks, keg it up, and taste it. So that's like the zero pressure, don't worry about it. None of these beers are sold. It's not for the public kind of thing. Whereas here, it's a little bit bigger. So pretty much everything we're doing here is going to get served to somebody in some form, unless it really doesn't work out. And yeah, I've dumped a few batches. I mean, every now and then you try a new idea and you just realize, whoa, that just didn't work, and it goes down the drain, and it's too bad. But for the most part, I think we have a pretty high hit percentage. And, and a lot of the beers, sometimes it's like, oh, that was fine. And, but that wasn't it. We got to move on, keep going on to the next thing. And so it's on tap for a little bit, and then it goes away.
Do you suppose that having an R&D facility, it attracts beer goers even more to Firestone Walker, being that it's stuff that you can't get anywhere else? It's product that could be once once in a lifetime, so to speak? Do you feel like that is part of the thrill too, when it comes as a consumer potentially?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think that was something that before 2016 was kind of lacking in our brewery. Whereas, you would go and visit our tap rooms and there might be a couple odds and ends of limited release stuff we would do that you would find, especially on the barrel side, there was always usually something interesting that you weren't going to find somewhere else. But for the most part, it was our core beers. And, and we were the kind of brewery that, we had a solid core lineup and we did a couple seasonals and then we had some interesting barrel stuff. And that was kind of, was our approach. We weren't the brewery that had a million different beers all the time. But having the Propagator, for the last 6 years now has really allowed us to make a lot of interesting beers that, when you come in, you never know what you're going to get. We usually always have a couple new IPAs we're working on and a couple new lagers and then, other stuff that you just never know what you're going to get. So I do think, that really helps. And, as a beer drinker myself, I definitely feel that where, when I'm visiting breweries, I don't want to just go and get whatever they have on tap, or I don't want that to be what you get at the supermarket. I'm always looking for interesting stuff. And, pretty much that's how everybody rolls these days. I mean, that's the norm is, as the proliferation of small breweries with tap rooms has kind of taken over, and that's most breweries now, that's most of the time what you're going to get. It's not like you're just visiting big breweries and it's like, oh, I can get that, at the store at home. So. Yeah.
Being one of four co-hosts on the show, festival goers that go to beer festivals, we're always looking for that one beer or that couple of beers that are just so off the wall, something that's just unheard of. And I think that's what draws me to those breweries is that they think about outside of the box ideas. Mm-hmm. And speaking of outside of the box ideas, is there something that you would like to try to do in the Propagator that you have not done yet just because of other projects and ideas that others within the brewery ranks would like to see? Is there something that you would like to do personally that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
Stuff's always coming to me. Yeah, it's interesting how that happens where you just kind of look around and you say, oh, I want to try something. But I don't think there's anything really that I've been like thinking about for a long time and just like, oh, I can't do that. Some of it's just brewing more traditional styles, and that might sound boring, but like I've been wanting to do a Grodziskie for a while, which is that low alcohol Polish smoked wheat beer. And every time I bring it up to anybody, they kind of go, I don't know about that, But then I go to other breweries that do it, and I think they're great. I don't know how well they sell, but it's a really cool beer. It's kind of a weird beer. Working on more different kind of fruit hybrid beers. I think, there's a few other ideas out there that we're kind of going down the road of starting to work on. So I think there's a lot of room to play around there. And so I think there's more to do. And I definitely thought of a few ideas with, different fruits and yeast that we don't use, but, as a production brewery, sometimes you have to think, you can't just bring another yeast strain in for a new beer all the time. It's already complicated enough. We run 3 yeast. We have 2 ale yeast and a lager yeast we run all the time. So sometimes when you say, hey, I want to start bringing in this other yeast for this other beer that maybe we're going to do, the guy that manages our yeast, Joe, he would just start cursing at you and say, you're crazy. I can't manage another yeast strain. We're not going to do that.
All right, one final question, and then I want to pass it to Ken. What is the craziest idea that you've come up with that people just didn't know was going to be a hit that turned out to be a hit at the Propagator in your time at Firestone Walker? What's the one crazy, or even if it's just a crazy idea that you implemented and it turned out to be good? What's that one that you put out?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything too crazy that ended up like that. I was trying to think of like the last little bit unorthodox thing we did that seemed to go over pretty well. It was on a pretty small scale, but we did a Kolsch with coffee and vanilla. And this is something that actually another guy here was asking. He's like, oh, we should do a coffee Kolsch. We should do a coffee Kolsch. And we hadn't done coffee in a lighter beer. But I found this really interesting Ethiopian coffee from a roaster not too far from here. And it had a lot of interesting berry notes and was kind of light and floral. And it really worked in a lighter beer. And so it was just kind of figuring out what kind of coffee would work well in a beer like that. And then, the vanilla was an interesting addition that it was a dry, crisp Kolsch, but it made the flavor seem like almost like sweeter and rounder, like this kind of like creamy coffee drink or something like that. But it was this dry, crisp beer. So that was a fun one. Wasn't really sure what was going to happen when we did that, but it ended up working out. But it's kind of funny because it's like every crazy idea. We used to make jokes back in the day about like, people would just come up with the most ridiculous description of all these things thrown together and say, oh, when are they going to do this? And it's like, they've all been done now, And so it's almost like not even novel anymore. I think a lot of people are just looking for really well balanced drinkable beers again, after being burned out on novelty and saying like, I don't need all these crazy ingredients in every beer I drink. I just want a beer that tastes really good and I enjoy. And I think for the most part, that's what we focus on is like, we're very careful about the different ingredients that we do bring in. And I think there has to be a lot of intent behind them. And so like every beer where we are bringing in new stuff, we're really looking at and saying, okay, what's the goal with this beer and what's the flavor profile that's going to make this really delicious, drinkable beer.
All right, there you go. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, there's a couple things that you've mentioned. You mentioned customers that were looking for, beverages due to celiacs. You also just mentioned, a lot of people are kind of sick of I always say when somebody mentions a beer, I always say too many ingredients. When they say that it's a vanilla, cocoa, chestnut, orangutan, I don't know what else.
Orangutan.
All of these types of flavors in there, it's just too much. But what are your thoughts on the industry? Because the industry is making a lot of the more niche beers to carry to those who are looking for now low and no ABV beers, like myself, who's got, a handful of NA beers in front of me. The people who are looking for gluten-free or gluten reduced beers, or even going into the world of FMBs and liquor-inspired beverages. All of these options people have been going towards. So as much as you're saying, we've blasted our palate too much that we want to go back to less complex, I still think, and you might disagree with me, that people still want different beers, different styles, and different beverages. What is your thoughts on that within the industry itself? And what are you doing at the Propagator to help cater to all of these large but small niche market opportunities? So that's a big question.
Yeah, we've been talking about non-alcoholic, low alcohol for a while, and I think it hasn't been a compelling enough market segment for us to really get moving on yet. But it's one of those things we keep thinking about, and we'll probably be doing a little experimentation here soon. It's kind of hard to get going on a small scale until you invest in the equipment if you want to do de-alcoholization. But there are some other approaches to it too, so we'll see what we can do. And
would there be a way, because you guys have, not necessarily in LA, but at least in California, a brand new neighbor, Athletic, who opened up a huge brewery out in San Diego. Can you contract how do you say it? De-alkalizing?
De-alkalizing, yeah. Yeah, you might be able to. That's interesting. I know of at least one other large brewery that's doing that right now, where they're sending beer to another brewery to do that process. So that's certainly an option. And I wonder if that's a way you're going to see more breweries kind of dipping their toe into the segment, just saying, okay, we're going to make a beer and then tanker it over to this other facility to do that process for us. Cause buying that equipment yourself is relatively expensive. And that's the traditional way that it's done is brewing a normal beer and then taking the alcohol out. You can either do it through a distillation process or through a membrane filtration process. But the other way is, there are special yeasts that basically don't produce alcohol, but produce the other flavor constituents. And, the approach to making beers like that is very different though, because you essentially aren't fully fermenting the beer. So you have to have other ways of kind of making the flavor come off correctly. So yeah, it's all interesting. It's definitely something we're looking at right now. But as far as other stuff going, like I was saying, we're continuing to look at seltzer and see where that goes. But I think like at our core, our flagship beer, is a no frills blonde ale, and our real kind of mission right now is to just be a beer brand and be a brewery that's known for just making beer and making really good beer. and making consistent beer that you can always count on, and not necessarily going to all these crazy new spaces. We kind of got to play both sides, but I think that's where our kind of energy is moving toward now, that, and then, with other stuff, obviously with IPAs, it's always, another big side for us. So we're always looking at new IPAs and, new approaches to hazy IPAs and West Coast IPAs. And I think continuing innovation there is a big part of what we're doing.
What do you think has allowed Firestone Walker to stay in business for the last 26 years? What has helped push you guys to being one of the top 10 producing breweries in the country?
I think there's a lot of methodical growth and planning along the way. And I think that's the history of Firestone, and as someone who, I've been a brewer for the entire time. So, there's a lot that I haven't seen behind the scenes, with the other operations of the company, but just seeing kind of how we work over the years. I think that for me, it's just been, that kind of slow and steady growth. And then also, taking good opportunities where they arise and seeing market segments that weren't necessarily fulfilled. I think when I started, there was no 805. And that for us is now about 70% of our overall production. So, and we're going to do a bit over 500,000 barrels a year this year. And about 70% of that is 805. So, seeing that and then taking that opportunity and then, doing all of the work it takes to make a consistent beer as a flagship that, can be counted on, in a wider market footprint. And then, delivering on the sales and marketing side to, make sure that market was able to grow for that beer, I think is something that, I have to give a lot of credit to the other side of the company outside of production. I feel really proud of the work we did on basically, continuing to grow the brewery over the years in order to make high quality, consistent beer. We started at 100,000 barrels. When I started, we were at 100,000 barrels. So, seeing 5-time growth over the last decade, it was difficult along the way every time, new tank blocks come in, new filters, all the utilities. I mean, from, putting in new glycol chillers to new steam boilers to, new electrical circuits. And, along the way through growth, there's so many things that need to fall into place. And so having a really good team of people working on that along the way so that you don't have too many hiccups and things keep running smoothly is really important. And then also on the business side, being really, just having a very solid approach to, the business fundamentals and, being well capitalized helped. I think that, the Duval partnership at the time it came was really good for us because it was a time when we needed to grow. We needed to put a lot of investment in order to, get a new, bigger brew house, to get, new filtration equipment, new tanks, everything like that. And taking on a partner that had a really good long-term vision that wasn't looking for a short-term return really helped us, I think, grow in a strategic way that helped, and I guess we'll see how that all turns out, and I don't want to criticize anyone else's approach, but I am very comfortable, I think, with the way things have gone and feel really good about how we did it.
I think it's interesting when we talk with brewers because a lot of very small local brewers, their bread and butter is always going to be their IPA or maybe a barrel-aged stout. But we just actually had earlier this week Shiner on, and their Bach is 70% of their portfolio. When we had, we talked to New Belgium, their big part of their portfolio, even with Voodoo Ranger now, is still Fat Tire. So when you have a not the number one selling beer style IPA as a huge part of your portfolio, it always interests me to see how you can control the market with something that's not an IPA because everyone thinks IPA is the only way to go. But you guys obviously make amazing IPAs. I know we've had a few of them on the show tonight between Rob and Nick. But we're going to be asking our final questions as we tie up this show and hopefully give you an opportunity to talk about what's upcoming over at the Propagator. But we'll start with Nick. Nick, what is your final question for Sam here?
I'm going to go with my go-to. What's in your fridge that is not Firestone Walker beer that you will be drinking? And I said this in our earlier episodes during opening weekend of baseball. What's in your fridge, not Firestone Walker, that you're drinking this weekend? All
right. So you got me at a bad time. I just spent last weekend. I was in New Orleans for a belated bachelor party that was supposed to happen in 2020 that had to be canceled. And so I'm kind of purposely laying low right now and not drinking too much beer for a while, even though I am having a beer with you guys at work. But the one thing I do have, and I hope this isn't a cop out, but we did a collaboration with Other Half, and we made a rice pilsner called Pivo Snaps that was brewed at Other Half in their Washington D.C. brewery, and they sent us some of that beer, and so that's all I've got is a can of that. And I'm going to enjoy the hell out of it when I do drink it.
You know what I do love about this, Nick, is that all of our guests are so honest, because you can lie so easily and just say insert random beer, but they're like,
yeah, I got a PBR. Yeah.
Or no, I mean,
Ham's light.
Yeah, Ham's light. I mean, typically we get brewers that do have their own stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. It's, you should be proud of what you make, but that I do appreciate the honesty. You're absolutely right.
Got to go where the beer is free and cheap. Dan, what's your final question?
Yeah. So, going back to that partnership or the collaborations you've done, if you could pick one LA or Orange County brewery to do a collab with that you haven't, who would it be and why?
Ooh, well, I guess I'll just say we are going to collaborate with Monkish. We have not yet, but that's the next one we're going to do. And that was one I really wanted to. So I have to show them some love and say that that's coming up pretty soon. And I'm really excited for it. I don't know. Do you want one that we haven't set up? I guess I'd have to think for a sec.
Is there one you would want to do a collaboration with that you haven't been able to?
Probably Craftsman.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, Craftsman, is one of the OG LA County breweries. They're out in Pasadena, and I don't know. I actually don't know anybody there, but I love their beer to death. And if we can make that happen someday, that would be really cool. I think they've been making great beer for so many years now. And I love breweries like them that they make some interesting stuff, but their pre-prohibition Pilsner, one of their year-round beers, is an amazing beer. Their Hefeweizen is amazing. And you could pretty much always find that on tap at Father's Office in LA, which is, one of the premier beer bars here that's been around for a long time. And so, whenever I show up drinking a pint of one of those is always really awesome. So that would be a lot of fun.
Great.
Robert.
All right. Recently, I think it was in September, you did an article in I think it was a Craft Beer and Brewing magazine about busting lager myths. I was kind of curious with that article, and I guess your thoughts today. What is the biggest myth about making lagers? Is it clarity, carbonation, maturity, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think, some of my thinking on that's maybe evolved a little bit. I had an interesting conversation while I was at the Lager Festival, Low and Slow, that Bagby Brewing Company had down in Oceanside in San Diego County back in the fall. And there were a lot of great lager brewers there, and we had a lot of interesting conversations. And probably the thing that I was already kind of queuing in on this in the article, but having this conversation really helped me out, was thinking that primary fermentation is so important in a lager, and developing the correct flavor profile going into lagering. And the lagering itself is really, in a lot of cases, isn't really, it does things, but there's different ways to approach it, and it doesn't need to necessarily be for a very long period. And, most of the reasons that beers were lagered for a long time in the past don't necessarily apply to us now. I firmly believe that. I think for most lighter beers, you can basically get around lagering, but fermenting, using a healthy lager yeast at an appropriate primary fermentation, in order to get the base flavor profile you're working with, is super, super important. And so I think that's the main one. So to me, if I would tell anybody about, with lagers, it's like pitch cold, add a healthy amount of oxygen, appropriate amount of oxygen, pitch an appropriate amount of yeast, make sure you're not under pitching, make sure, your fermentation's kicking off well. And to me, that's the core of it. Yeah. And that's how I feel about it, where it's not, I've seen a lot of interesting approaches where people pitching warm and cooling down, or under pitching, or, under oxygenating, getting these really sluggish fermentations with lots of sulfur. So, I think, that's really, to me, the core of that is really that primary fermentation, to let that that lager yeast lock in that appropriate flavor profile. And the lagering itself, I think brewers focus too much on, and they say, oh, I just need to lager for this many weeks. And it's like, well, what is that doing for you? And, and are there other ways in your process that you could be approaching things to make that more efficient instead of just sitting around?
There you go.
All right. So for my final question, I actually got two for you. One, what makes a better martini, vodka or gin?
Well, if you use vodka, it's not a martini. So there you go.
I follow you on your Twitter account, which you do a lot of chatting with other brewers and other organizations. And I did see that comment, so I wanted to ask just to poke the bear a little bit. No, my actual question, because you're such an intelligent mind when it comes to beer and brewing. We are not. The royal we better on draft. If I were to ask for someone who may be wanting to learn a little bit more about craft beer and brewing, what website, podcast, social media platform would you suggest someone to start in a beginner format learning about craft beer and brewing?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, most of the stuff I consume is at least somewhat geared toward that kind of industry or more experienced brewer perspective. Maybe it depends on what you want to get into. When I was just starting out, I listened to a lot of Brewing Network, and, between like Brew Strong and the Jamil Show, Sunday Session, those, I just learned so much about brewing. But I was really diving into homebrew culture at the time and trying to learn as much as I could about brewing. So, for someone who's not so into that, I'm not sure how applicable that would be. I think Good Beer Hunting, I like the stuff that they do as far as like more general interest stuff. But for me, it's more brewer stuff. So I can really only comment as far as like, if you're more serious about the technical brewing side and want to learn about how beer's made, I think, Craft Beer and Brewing does an amazing podcast with that. I really like the Brewosophy podcast too. Just started getting into that. I got a shout out to the Full Pint here in LA. I love the Full Pint podcast, and that's a little more general interest. Danny and Johnny, I love it when they do the Q&A episodes. I love Danny's interviews. So yeah, that's probably about it. I don't know. I guess I try to kind of pare down to, it's like, there's only so much time in the day. So you got to find the most efficient way to get your information.
All right. Well, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. If you are over in the LA area, go check out the Propagator and get a bunch of different, non-standard Firestone Walker beers, the beers that you're not going to be finding out on the stores and the shelves. Great opportunity to try just new beers. Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. We appreciate it. No matter what you think of your beer, we think it's better on draft. Have a good night.
Peace.